Hey guys, it's Courtney. Today is day 23 of my Christmas card series, and it is also day 1 of Diecember over at Simon Says Stamp. So I'm going to be using the new stylized angel die from Simon, and I also am using the stitched rectangle die, both the largest and the second to largest, to create 2 frames. And I just kind of line those up where those little notch lines are when they're connected when you first purchase them. That's the easiest way to line those up. Now for the angel, I'm going to be cutting this out of black cardstock as well as white cardstock, and I'm using some double-sided adhesive by Sizzix. You just peel one side back, lay that on your cardstock. Die goes on the cardstock side when you run it through your die cutting machine, and then you will have that whole piece with adhesive on one side, which this is such an intricate die. This is the best and easiest way to do that. So we're going to go ahead and kind of put everything together. Now, when I first saw this die, it reminded me of a stained glass window. So that's kind of sorta what we're creating today. So I'm just kind of poking through all of these pieces here, and all of these little pieces ended up sticking everywhere because they had adhesive on that one side. So you'll see that as I'm coloring and things like that, you'll see me kind of pick off these little pieces from my fingers. So I am laying this onto a piece of white cardstock here, and this is cut to the same size as that large stitched rectangle die. That way my frame will fit nicely. Went ahead and laid down my angel, and then I'm just going to use some Tombow Mono multi-glue to adhere this frame. I didn't bother to put double-sided adhesive on this because the spaces are big enough where I can kind of add my own adhesive. So I went ahead and lined that up around the edges, and then we're going to be doing some very, very quick Copic coloring. You can use any medium you want here, but I am going to start off with the angel wings. And now there's separate little pieces to these. So I'm just going to add a little bit of shading with the C3, and then I'm going to blend that out with the C1, and then finally move to the C00, which is pretty much clear. It's pretty much a colorless blender, but that'll get these gray markers to blend well. And I'm going to color both of these wings the same way. And I just really concentrated the darkest areas being at the base of each one of these sections of the wings, I guess where they would be coming out from behind her. So once both of my wings were done, I'm going to switch over to some warm grays, and I'm just going to use 3 warm grays here, and I am going to be using the darkest, which is the W5, right there on the top, as well as the bottom section as well. These are 2 separate sections here, so I'm going to add shading to both. Going to go ahead and blend that out with the W3 and then finish off with the W1, and I'm not too concerned about going over the lines of the die. They're going to be covered up later. So I'm just mainly coloring in the little sections of the die, or the openings of the die. And this is going to look terrible. Keep going. I promise it will look better once everything is said and done, but it is going to look really, really bad. So once I had the warm grays down, I'm going to move on to what is my favorite gold combination, and I'm going to start off with the E99, which is my shading here, and I'm just going to go around her head, I guess, and blend that out with the Y26, and then finish off with the Y23 on the top. There are 2 little pieces underneath her hair that I didn't notice, but I will go back and fix those later. And now for her face, I am going to use just 3 of my regular skin tones. The blending doesn't have to be perfect here, so I'm going right in with my darkest color. I'm not worried about getting the paper too saturated. Trust me, you won't notice too much of the shading if you didn't get a perfect blend. For her hair, I'm going to switch over to some E20 markers, and I'm pretty much filling in a majority of this with the E29, and then I'll blend that out with the E25 and leave the tips of her hair, the ends of her hair, for the E21, just to have a little bit of contrast there. This is kind of difficult to get in these little teeny tiny areas, so you'll see that I kind of twist and turn my marker, and most of the time it's straight up and down, and that's just so that I can get the tip of the marker into those little spaces without going out of the lines too much or going over the lines too much. So once my angel was all colored in, I am going to move on to the background, and I'm going to be using my favorite red combination, but this time I am saturating the paper just a little bit with that R22, which is my lightest color, just because this is a huge area, and if my blending isn't good, it will be a little bit more noticeable. Next, I'm going to go in with my darkest color here, which is the R89, which is my scary dark color. I did have to refill my R22, and I can tell you that this is my favorite combination for all of my reds, and I've been using it so much during this card series that I have had to refill the R22 twice. I've had to refill the R24 twice, same for the R46, but I have not refilled the R89 because I don't have a refill for it. But you can see that I'm not really getting too much ink going down with the R89. It's starting to run a little dry. I definitely have to put that on my list of refills to get. But I did flick that color out a little bit on the corners and then just pretty much outlined that frame. For the R46, I'm just doing the same thing, and I'm just going to extend those flick lines in each one of the corners. And you can see that these colors are not blending as well as they normally do, and that's only because my R89 was going a little bit dry. So when you're adding the color, and especially, honestly, especially if it's the darkest or the lightest color, if it's dry, if it's not well filled or inked, you're not going to get a good blend. So in this case, I didn't. So it is what it is. I'm going to go on to the R24 and extend those areas out again, and then I'm going to move back to that R22, and I'm going to fill in the rest of the areas. Now I'm going a little bit slower with the R22 just to make sure that I don't go over or into my image itself. An R22 is a very light red, but it's still a red, and it would be very difficult to remove if I happen to go over the angel itself. So I still wasn't getting a great blend, so I went back in with that R24 just to extend that out a little bit further, and then back to that R22, and that seemed to blend a little bit better. When you're working with a large area like this, you may have to go back and forth between your midtones and your highlight color. So now that my coloring is done, and it looks atrocious, but I promise it'll get better, I'm going to take some of the Nouveau Glaze. I think that's not the right name, but I'll link it below, which is very similar to Glossy Accents, but to me, it's a little bit thinner. But I prefer my Glossy Accents, and I hoard it, and I have this big area to fill, and I don't want to waste my Glossy Accents on it, so I'm going to use the Nouveau. So I'm filling in each one of these little sections of the die cut itself, one at a time. It doesn't matter if they overlap a little bit, but I just basically outline that each individual section and then fill it all in and kind of let it spread on its own. This is a lot thinner than Glossy Accents, and it tends to be very wet. I mean, they're both wet, but this one tends to be very, very wet. So I would recommend, if you're using these cardstocks or in the same way, you definitely use a heavyweight cardstock, because this will tend to warp your paper a little bit because it is so wet. There's so much moisture in it. So once the angel is complete, I'm going to go ahead and fill in the entire background as well. But this is a huge background, so I'm going to kind of section it off on my own. So I'm going to start off with just one of the corners here and kind of outline a little section, and I'm kind of just making this up as I go along. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm kind of boxing it in and then filling it all in, let that glaze kind of spread out and smooth out. But here is where you want to kind of work a little bit quick, because you're going to have to meet the area that we started at, and we want those areas to kind of mesh and spread together, and you don't want to wait too long because it will start to dry. So you have to work somewhat quick. Don't put it down and come back 10 minutes later, because it just won't look right. But as long as you work fairly quickly, those two areas will kind of mesh together and you won't have a problem. Now I put this aside to dry for about 4 or 5 hours, thinking I should be fine. And I wasn't fine. I probably should have let it sit another hour or two, but I don't have all that much patience. So I finished the card anyway. So once I did come back and I was tired of waiting, I will go ahead and take that black angel, the one that we cut from the black cardstock, and I'm just going to very slowly and very carefully line that up directly over that white die cut. Now we have an outline to the image, and it's all starting to come together. Now for the frame, because I wasn't thinking in the beginning, instead of cutting this out of the same black cardstock, I cut it out of white, and I don't want it to be white. I want it to be a black frame. So I'm not going to recut it because I probably won't line those two dies up perfectly again like I did the first time. So I'm just going to take my black Copic marker and I'm going to color it. This is the great thing about having any color medium at all, especially markers. You can make any color cardstock you want without having to invest a ton of money into cardstock itself. You have the markers, let's use them to the full potential. So once that was all colored in, and now that I have a black frame for my little stained glass window here, I am going to bring back out my Tombow Mono Multi Glue, because remember, this one does not have that double-sided adhesive on it. And I am just going to carefully line this up around my white frame that I already have down. Now, I do have areas of that glaze that are still wet, so I'm trying to be super, super careful, but just let it sit. My advice to you is just wait. I should take my own advice, but I didn't. Last, I am going to go ahead and use that same Tombow Mono Multi Glue to adhere this to a white A2 top folding note card. And I'm going to skip the sentiment. I'll go ahead and stamp the sentiment in the inside once everything really is dry. And that is it. That is the card for today, guys. Thank you guys so much for stopping by today, and have a great day. Bye.